Every year Ramzan arrives like a sacred pause in the noise of life. Hunger slows the body, silence softens the heart, and for a brief moment people feel closer to something deeper than routine existence. Promises are made, habits are restrained, tears come easier, prayers feel heavier with meaning. Yet when the month ends, something mysterious happens. Some people walk away permanently changed, as if they touched a truth they cannot forget. Others slowly return to who they were before, as if nothing truly happened at all. The same fasting, the same prayers, the same nights of reflection, but completely different outcomes. Why? What invisible line separates temporary discipline from lasting transformation? What shifts inside one soul but not another? This is not just about Ramzan. This is about the hidden mechanics of human change itself. Because real transformation is never forced by time, but awakened by deep conscious surrender. Something fascinating happens every year. People change, but only for a while. They wake earlier than usual, they speak more gently, they control their anger, guard their words, restrain their habits, and become unusually aware of their actions. They pray with focus, they reflect on life, they promise themselves they will never return to who they used to be, and, in that moment, they truly mean it. Yet weeks later, the intensity fades. Without old habits quietly return, the urgency dissolves. The heightened awareness slips away like water through open fingers. The person who once felt deeply connected to purpose now moves again through routine, distraction and forgetfulness. What felt like transformation slowly reveals itself to have been something else entirely, temporary adjustment. This is the illusion of change. But why does this happen? Why can a person feel so different, so sincere, so awakened, and still return to the same patterns? Because most change during Ramzan is environmental, not internal. When the environment changes, behavior changes automatically. The structure of the day is different. The rhythm of life slows, social expectations shift. Everyone around you is engaged in restraint, reflection and discipline. The world itself feels quieter, more intentional, more spiritually charged. In such an atmosphere, even the most distracted mind becomes temporarily focused. But environment can influence behavior without transforming identity. Imagine placing someone in a silent library. They will whisper, move gently, and act respectfully. Not necessarily because they have become a quieter person, but because the environment demands it. The moment they leave, their behavior changes again. Ramzan, for many, functions like a sacred environment that shapes behavior from the outside. It provides structure, strong enough to suppress impulses. But suppression is not the same as transformation. Suppression is pressure from outside. Transformation is change from within. This is where the illusion forms. When people experience themselves behaving differently for an extended period, they assume they have become different. But behavior is the surface. Identity lives underneath. Real change happens only when identity shifts. If a person stops speaking harshly because the atmosphere feels sacred, that is restraint. But if they stop speaking harshly because their heart no longer desires to harm, that is transformation. If someone avoids wrongdoing because they fear breaking the sanctity of the month, that is compliance. But if they avoid wrongdoing because their inner perception of right and wrong has permanently sharpened, that is awakening. Temporary change feels powerful because it is intense, but intensity is not permanence. Human beings are highly adaptable. We can adjust quickly to new conditions. Soldiers adapt to discipline. Students adapt to academic pressure. Workers adapt to demanding schedules. And during Ramzan, people adapt to spiritual structure. But adaptation ends when pressure disappears. True transformation does not depend on pressure. It survives in freedom. This is why the end of Ramzan becomes a moment of revelation. When structure dissolves, when social expectations relax, when daily life returns to normal, whatever remains is real. Whatever disappears was never deeply rooted. Many people misunderstand this moment. They feel guilty, confused, or disappointed when their spiritual intensity fades. They think they failed. But in reality, something important has been revealed to them. The difference between who they became temporarily and who they truly are internally. Temporary change is like holding your breath underwater. You can do it for a while with effort, but eventually the body returns to its natural rhythm. Permanent change is learning to breathe differently altogether. The illusion becomes even stronger because temporary change feels meaningful. And it is meaningful. Experiencing discipline, reflection and heightened awareness is not fake. It is real experience. But experience alone does not guarantee integration. You can visit a place without living there. Many people visit a higher version of themselves during Ramzan. They see what they are capable of. They taste clarity. They feel spiritual depth. But visiting is not the same as relocating. Permanent transformation requires something deeper than exposure. It requires redefinition, a restructuring of how a person sees themselves, their purpose, and their relationship with desire, time, and awareness. Without that restructuring, behavior slowly drifts back to familiar patterns. Not because the person is weak, but because identity always pulls behavior back toward its center. This is the hidden truth. People do not return to old habits because they forgot their spiritual experience. They return because their core self was never rebuilt around that experience. Temporary change modifies actions. Permanent change rebuilds the self that produces those actions. And until that inner reconstruction happens, change will always feel real in the moment and fragile over time. This is the illusion many live inside, believing they transformed, when in reality they only paused. The deeper question is not why change fades. The deeper question is why, for some people, it does not. There is something unusual about discipline during Ramzan. It does not feel forced. It does not feel mechanical. It does not even feel like struggle in the way ordinary self-control does. Instead, it feels meaningful, almost natural, as if restraint itself carries a quiet sweetness. The same person who finds daily discipline exhausting can suddenly fast from dawn to sunset. The same mind that resists routine prayer now moves toward it willingly. The same impulses that normally feel overpowering become strangely manageable. Hunger is endured, sleep is sacrificed, habits are paused. And yet, instead of feeling deprived, many people feel elevated. Why? Because discipline in ordinary life is usually driven by obligation. But discipline in Ramzan is driven by meaning, and meaning changes everything. When people try to discipline themselves outside of Ramzan, they often feel they are fighting against themselves. One part of the mind imposes rules, while another part resists them. It feels like internal conflict, control battling desire, effort battling comfort. Discipline becomes exhausting because it feels like loss. You are giving something up. You are denying yourself. You are restricting freedom. But during Ramzan, discipline is reframed. It is no longer experienced as loss. It is experienced as devotion. This shift is subtle but powerful. The same act that once felt like deprivation now feels like offering. Hunger is no longer just hunger, it becomes awareness. Restraint is no longer suppression, it becomes purification. Effort is no longer pressure, it becomes intention made visible. When discipline is connected to purpose, the mind stops interpreting it as suffering. Human beings can endure extraordinary hardship when they believe it carries meaning. The body may feel discomfort, but the heart feels alignment. And alignment reduces resistance. The inner conflict that normally drains energy begins to dissolve. This is why fasting in Ramzan often feels easier than ordinary self-control. The struggle is still there, but it is no longer empty. It is filled with significance. Every moment of restraint feels witnessed. Every act of discipline feels purposeful. Every sacrifice feels seen, not just by others, but at a deeper spiritual level. Meaning transforms effort into something almost sacred. But there is another layer to this experience, something psychological, something deeply human. During Ramzan, discipline is shared. You are not restraining yourself alone. Entire communities move together in synchronized effort. Millions of people wake before dawn. Millions abstain from food at the same time. Millions stand in prayer at night. The individual struggle becomes part of a collective rhythm. And when struggle becomes collective, it becomes lighter. Humans are profoundly influenced by shared experience. When everyone around you is practicing restraint, discipline stops feeling unusual. It becomes normal. It becomes expected. It becomes part of the atmosphere itself. Outside of Ramzan, discipline isolates you. During Ramzan, discipline connects you. This connection produces emotional reinforcement. You feel supported, even without words. You feel carried by something larger than personal willpower. And because you are moving with others, discipline feels less like resistance and more like participation. You are not forcing yourself to change. You are flowing with a current already moving. There is also a powerful shift in attention. In ordinary life, discipline often feels like a constant reminder of what you cannot have. The mind keeps returning to the forbidden thing, the food, the habit, the comfort being denied. But in Ramzan, attention is redirected toward awareness itself. Hunger becomes a reminder of presence. Thirst becomes a reminder of dependence. Silence becomes a reminder of reflection. Instead of obsessing over what is missing, the mind becomes aware of what is being revealed. Patience, fragility, gratitude, self-observation. This changes the emotional tone of discipline completely. It stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like discovery. You are not just controlling yourself, you are observing yourself. And observation creates distance between impulse and action. That distance is where freedom quietly grows. But here is the deeper truth. The reason discipline feels different in Ramzan is not only because the month changes you, it is because the month reveals a capacity that was always inside you. Ramzan does not create your ability to endure hunger, control anger, or resist habit. It exposes that ability. It shows you that discipline is not impossible. It shows you that your impulses are not as powerful as they once seemed. It shows you that awareness can guide behavior more than desire can. For a moment you see clearly that you are capable of living differently. And that realization is both inspiring and unsettling. Because once you know you are capable of higher discipline, the question arises, why does it fade afterward? If discipline can feel meaningful, purposeful, collective, and even peaceful during Ramzan, why does it feel heavy, forced, and fragile outside it? The answer lies not in discipline itself, but in what sustains it, and that leads to something deeper than effort. Something hidden within the environment that shapes the mind before the mind even realizes it is being shaped. Most of the time, life does not give us space to think. It gives us motion, noise, distraction, urgency. The modern rhythm of existence keeps the mind occupied just enough to prevent deep awareness from surfacing. Days pass filled with tasks, conversations, screens, responsibilities, and endless stimulation. There is always something to respond to, something to consume, something to escape into. And in that constant movement, the self remains hidden from itself. Reflection requires interruption. It requires stillness. It requires a slowing down of external input, so that internal experience can finally be heard. But ordinary life rarely allows this. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unproductive. Emptiness feels threatening. So people keep moving, not always because they must, but because stopping would mean facing what is inside. Ramzan disrupts this pattern completely. It does not just introduce discipline. It restructures the environment of experience itself. And this restructuring quietly forces reflection, even for those who never intended to reflect at all. The first shift is physical. Hunger and thirst interrupt the body's normal rhythm. Eating is no longer automatic. Drinking is no longer unconscious. The most basic acts of comfort, the ones people rarely notice, suddenly disappear for hours each day. And when physical comfort disappears, awareness increases. The body becomes impossible to ignore. Sensations become sharper. Energy fluctuates. Time feels different. The usual flow of unconscious living is replaced by a subtle but constant reminder. Something is different. Something is missing. Something requires attention. This interruption breaks the illusion of automatic living. But the deeper shift is not just physical. It is temporal. Ramzan changes the structure of time. Meals happen at precise moments. Sleep schedules adjust. Nights carry unusual significance. Certain hours feel sacred, weighty, charged with intention. The day is no longer an endless blur of interchangeable moments. It becomes segmented, meaningful, structured around awareness. And when time becomes meaningful, attention follows. People begin noticing transitions. Dawn, sunset, nightfall. They become conscious of passing hours. They anticipate moments rather than drifting through them. Time stops feeling like something that simply happens, and starts feeling like something that must be experienced intentionally. This alone begins to pull the mind inward. But perhaps the most powerful environmental shift is social silence. Not literal silence, but a reduction of ordinary indulgence. Conversations change tone. Entertainment reduces. Certain distractions lose their appeal. There is a subtle collective withdrawal from excess stimulation. When external noise decreases, internal noise becomes audible. Thoughts that were previously buried under activity begin to surface. Emotions that were postponed begin to rise. Memories, regrets, questions, and long-ignored realizations quietly emerge into awareness. Many people do not plan to reflect during Ramzan. They simply find themselves thinking more deeply, feeling more intensely, remembering more clearly, because the environment leaves them fewer places to escape. Ordinary life offers countless ways to avoid self-awareness. Food for comfort, entertainment for distraction, social engagement for avoidance, busyness for emotional suppression. But when these escape routes are temporarily restricted, the mind has only one direction left to turn, inward, and inward is where reflection lives. This is why Ramzan often feels emotionally intense. People feel softer, more sensitive, more aware of their own inner state. Small things affect them more deeply. Words carry more weight. Silence feels fuller. Even ordinary moments seem to hold unusual meaning. It is not that new emotions are being created. It is that hidden emotions are finally being noticed. The environment has removed enough distraction to expose what was already present. But here is the most important part. This reflection is not entirely voluntary. It is gently imposed by structure. A person may intend only to fast physically, yet still find themselves thinking about life, purpose, mistakes, relationships, mortality, and meaning. The environment guides attention whether one consciously chooses it or not. This is why Ramzan can feel transformative even for those who make no deliberate effort to change. The structure itself performs psychological work. It slows the pace of living. It reduces sensory overload. It interrupts automatic gratification. It organizes time around awareness. It softens social energy. It limits escape. And in doing so it creates conditions where reflection becomes almost unavoidable. But forced reflection is not the same as chosen reflection. Many people experience insight during Ramzan, simply because the environment reveals truths they could not previously see. Yet seeing something clearly, even deeply, does not guarantee lasting change, because when the environment shifts back, reflection becomes optional again, and most people, once given the choice, return to movement instead of stillness, distraction instead of awareness, comfort instead of confrontation. This is why the environment can trigger reflection, but cannot guarantee transformation. It can open the door inward, but it cannot make a person walk through it willingly, or stay inside long enough to truly change. And this leads to a deeper distinction, one that explains why reflection alone is not enough. Because noticing your patterns is not the same as breaking them. There is a profound difference between stopping a habit and no longer needing it. From the outside, both look identical. A person who once indulged in certain behaviors suddenly stops. They restrain themselves. They resist urges. They maintain control. To observers, and often to themselves, it appears as if change has occurred. But internally, two completely different processes may be taking place. In one case, the desire still exists, alive and active, but contained. In the other, the desire itself has been altered, weakened, or dissolved. The behavior may look the same, but the inner reality is not even close. This is the difference between suppression and transformation. During Ramzan, many habits are suppressed. Very few are truly transformed. Suppression is an act of pressure. It is when awareness or external structure forces a barrier between impulse and action. The urge rises, but it is held back. The mind still wants, but the body does not comply. The internal pattern remains intact. It is simply restrained by discipline, meaning, or environment. This requires effort. Constant effort. Imagine holding a door closed while someone pushes from the other side. As long as you apply force, the door stays shut. But the pressure never disappears. The moment you relax even slightly, the door swings open again, not because anything new happened, but because nothing inside actually changed. Suppression is temporary control over an unchanged system. Inner transformation is something entirely different. It is not about holding the door shut. It is about the person on the other side no longer pushing. The urge itself loses intensity. The psychological attachment weakens. The emotional need that once fueled the behavior dissolves or evolves into something else. The habit does not require constant resistance, because the internal force driving it has shifted. Transformation is not restraint, it is reconfiguration. This distinction explains one of the greatest mysteries people experience after Ramzan, the sudden return of habits that seemed conquered. During the month, structure is strong, awareness is high, social reinforcement is constant, meaning is present. All these forces combine to help suppress behaviors effectively. People feel powerful, in control, victorious over impulses that once seemed unmanageable. But when the external structure disappears, the internal structure reveals itself. If desire was merely suppressed, it re-emerges with surprising speed, sometimes even stronger than before. Not because Ramzan failed, but because the underlying psychological patterns were never dismantled. They were paused, not healed. This can feel deeply confusing. A person may sincerely believe they have changed. After all, they successfully lived differently for an entire month. How could that not mean transformation occurred? Because duration is not proof of depth. A habit can be suppressed for weeks, months, even years, and still remain psychologically alive beneath the surface. Time alone does not dissolve attachment. Only understanding, awareness, and inner restructuring can do that. Most habits are not just repeated behaviors. They are solutions, imperfect, often unconscious solutions to emotional needs. Comfort, escape, stimulation, identity reinforcement, stress relief, control, avoidance, self-soothing. When a habit is suppressed without addressing the need it serves, the mind simply waits. The underlying tension remains unresolved. The emotional imbalance remains active. And eventually, the system returns to equilibrium by restoring the behavior that once managed that need. This is why true transformation requires more than discipline. It requires insight. A person must see not just what they do, but why they do it. They must recognize the emotional, cognitive, and existential role the habit plays in their inner life. Only then can that role be replaced, redefined, or dissolved. Without this awareness, suppression becomes a temporary interruption, not a permanent shift. Ramzan provides powerful conditions for suppression. It interrupts routines. It increases awareness. It strengthens intention. It reduces environmental triggers. It creates meaning around restraint. All of this makes habit control more accessible than usual. But accessibility is not permanence. For some individuals, something deeper happens during this period. They do not merely restrain themselves, they observe themselves. They study their impulses. They notice emotional triggers. They question their attachments. They confront the discomfort habits were designed to mask. They become curious about their own patterns. And curiosity is the beginning of transformation. Because once a person truly understands the inner mechanism of a habit, its emotional roots, its psychological purpose, its hidden cost, the desire can begin to change naturally, not through force, but through clarity. Awareness dissolves illusions, and many habits survive only because their true nature remains unseen. But not everyone moves into this depth of observation. Many remain at the level of behavioral control. They fast, they restrain, they comply, but they do not investigate the inner architecture of their impulses. And so when the structure that supported suppression disappears, the unchanged architecture resumes operation. Nothing pulls them back. They simply return to what was always there. This is why lasting change feels rare. Because suppression is easier than transformation. Control is easier than self-confrontation. Behavior is easier to modify than identity. And discipline is easier to sustain temporarily than understanding is to sustain permanently. But the people who change forever during Ramzan are not just controlling their habits, they are watching them closely enough to outgrow them. There is something profoundly different about worship when it is done alone, and when it is done together. Alone, worship is quiet, personal, inward. It depends entirely on your own motivation, your own emotional state, your own level of awareness. Nothing carries you, nothing surrounds you. You must generate presence from within yourself. But in Ramzan, worship rarely feels solitary. Even when physically alone, a person is aware that millions of others are standing, fasting, praying, reflecting at the same time. There is a powerful sense of shared movement, as if countless individual hearts are beating within one synchronized rhythm. And this changes the human mind in ways most people never consciously notice. Human beings are deeply social creatures. Our emotions, behaviors, and even perceptions are shaped by the presence of others. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, the tendency to absorb and mirror the feelings and states of those around us. When people gather in shared intention, their individual awareness begins to align. Their focus intensifies. Their emotional experience amplifies. In collective worship, attention becomes contagious. If you stand alone in silence, your mind may wander. But when you stand among others who are deeply focused, their stillness influences your stillness. Their sincerity sharpens your sincerity. Their presence anchors your attention. The atmosphere itself begins to carry concentration for you. It becomes easier to feel what others are feeling, even without words. This is why collective worship often feels more intense than private devotion. Not necessarily more authentic, but more emotionally powerful. The shared environment amplifies inner experience, just as multiple voices singing together create resonance far stronger than a single voice alone. There is also the psychological effect of belonging. In everyday life, People often feel fragmented, separate individuals moving through separate struggles. But during Ramzan, collective worship dissolves this sense of isolation. You are no longer just one person trying to be disciplined. You are part of a vast community moving toward the same intention. This creates emotional safety. When people feel they belong to something larger than themselves, resistance decreases, effort feels meaningful, struggle feels shared, fatigue feels purposeful. The burden of discipline becomes distributed across many hearts instead of resting on one. Belonging reduces psychological friction, and when friction decreases, behavior flows more easily. Acts that would normally require immense willpower suddenly feel natural. Standing longer in prayer, controlling speech, restraining impulses, remaining present. All of this becomes more sustainable when supported by collective energy. But there is an even deeper layer. Something more subtle, more powerful. Collective worship shapes identity. When a person repeatedly participates in shared rituals, their sense of self begins to merge with the group's values and behaviors. They stop experiencing devotion as a personal choice and begin experiencing it as part of who they are within the collective. I am someone who worships. Gradually becomes we are people who worship. This shift is profound. Identity formed in isolation is fragile. Identity formed in community feels reinforced, validated, and stable. Each person's sincerity strengthens the sincerity of others. Each act of devotion becomes social proof that this way of living is real, meaningful, and possible. The group becomes a mirror reflecting who you believe yourself to be. During Ramzan, this mirror is everywhere. In homes, in gatherings, in shared schedules, in synchronized routines, the individual self is constantly reflected back as part of a larger spiritual movement. And this reflection strengthens commitment without conscious effort. But here lies a quiet paradox. Collective worship can elevate spiritual experience without necessarily deepening individual transformation. Because when the group carries your focus, your discipline, your emotional intensity, you may experience depth without fully generating it yourself. You feel uplifted, but part of that uplift comes from external reinforcement. The environment sustains awareness that might otherwise fade. This is not false. It is real experience. But it is supported experience, and supported states are vulnerable when support disappears. When Ramzan ends, the collective rhythm dissolves. The synchronized movement fragments. The shared intensity softens. The emotional mirror that once reinforced identity becomes less visible. Now the individual stands alone again, and this is where the hidden psychological test begins. If a person relied primarily on collective energy to sustain devotion, their spiritual intensity may fade when that energy withdraws. Not because they lack sincerity, but because the structure that amplified their awareness is no longer surrounding them. But for others, something different happens. They absorb the collective experience so deeply that it reshapes their inner structure. The group no longer carries them, because what they felt together has been internalized. The external rhythm becomes an internal rhythm. The shared awareness becomes personal awareness. They no longer need the crowd to feel present, because presence has become part of their independent state of being. This is the dividing line. Some people participate in collective worship, others are transformed by it. The first group is carried by the experience. The second group becomes capable of carrying it alone. And that difference determines who returns unchanged, and who never fully returns to who they were before. Ramzan is not only a month of external restraint, it is a month that touches the heart. Yet the mystery lies in why some hearts seem to open effortlessly, while others remain closed, unchanged, or even hardened. The same environment, the same fasting, the same prayers, the same nights of reflection can produce profoundly different effects in different people. The heart's response is never uniform because it is shaped by layers of experience, conditioning, and internal architecture. Some hearts have accumulated enough weariness, curiosity, or latent longing that the gentle pressure of Ramzan becomes a trigger. Fasting, reflection, prayer, and collective worship act like sunlight on a dormant seed. It begins to sprout almost naturally. For these hearts, restraint does not feel like punishment. Silence does not feel like emptiness. Hunger does not feel like deprivation. Each act of discipline becomes a channel for self-awareness, compassion, and empathy. Anger softens, grudges fade, and the mind allows quiet introspection to permeate daily life. These individuals are ready to meet themselves, and the month gives them the invitation and the space. But not every heart is ready. Some resist because the same structures that guide others inward also illuminate what they are not yet willing to confront. Fear of change, Attachment to identity, unresolved grief, and unconscious defense mechanisms form invisible walls. The heart remains armored, not because it cannot feel, but because it fears feeling. Vulnerability can be dangerous to an ego that has relied on habitual patterns for survival. The softening of the heart often correlates with emotional readiness. A person who has been quietly questioning, who has carried unspoken longing, or who has experienced the friction of life's impermanence, may find Ramzan opening doors that were already unlocked internally. Meanwhile, resistance is often a reflection of inner dissonance. The self is not yet aligned with the discipline, meaning, and reflection that the month offers. Spiritual psychology also plays a role. Some hearts are guided by awareness more than habit. These individuals notice subtle shifts in themselves and others. They are curious observers of their own impulses. They do not merely obey rituals, they allow rituals to reveal the state of their consciousness. Softness emerges naturally in such hearts because introspection dissolves rigidity. Resistance, conversely, often originates from misalignment between outer action and inner readiness. A person may follow rituals perfectly, fasting punctually, praying meticulously, giving charity, yet remain unmoved internally. The external performance can be flawless while the internal structure remains unchanged. The heart resists because it is not yet anchored in the deeper purpose that gives Ramzan its transformative power. There is also a subtle interplay between empathy and self-awareness. Soft hearts often emerge in individuals who can feel both their own suffering and the suffering of others. Hunger becomes not only a test of self-discipline, but a doorway to compassion. Isolation becomes not loneliness but insight. Resistance often emerges in hearts still bound to self-centered perspective. The experience is observed but not integrated emotionally. The paradox is that neither approach is inherently permanent. A soft heart can harden over time if awareness is lost. A resistant heart can awaken later if conditions align, lessons mature, and internal readiness develops. Ramzan is not a guarantee of transformation. It is a mirror reflecting what the heart is prepared to see and embrace. Ultimately, hearts soften because the month creates both external and internal alignment. Structured time, collective reflection, disciplined practice, and heightened awareness converge with latent readiness within the individual. Hearts resist when internal readiness is absent, when self-protection outweighs curiosity, or when the patterns that have shaped identity remain too rigid to yield. And so the difference between the softened and the resistant heart is not in the month itself, but in the invisible intersection of preparation and opportunity, of internal alignment and external invitation. Ramzan cannot force a heart open. It can only provide conditions for awakening, the choice to soften, to feel, to allow transformation that rests entirely within the person. Fasting is often understood as a physical exercise, abstaining from food, drink, and indulgence from dawn to sunset. Most people see it as a test of endurance, patience, or willpower. Yet in the deepest sense, fasting during Ramzan is not merely about the body. It is an invitation to confront the ego itself, that subtle, often invisible part of the self that shapes identity, justifies desire, and defends habitual patterns. The body experiences hunger, thirst, fatigue, and weakness. These sensations are tangible, immediate, and unavoidable. They remind us of our physical limits and dependence. Managing the body requires conscious restraint. One must not eat, drink, or give in to habitual indulgence. This is discipline at the surface level, and for many, it is the primary challenge of Ramzan. The ego, however, is far less visible, far more insidious. It is the voice that justifies breaking the fast. I am too tired, I deserve this, or skipping this meal won't matter. It is the part of the mind that measures piety against others, compares performance, or seeks recognition for restraint. Unlike the body, the ego cannot be disciplined by rules alone. Its hunger is deeper, subtler, and often unconscious. Fasting the body is temporary. Fasting the ego is transformative. The body will eventually eat again. The ego, left unchecked, will always seek gratification, superiority, or control. True transformation comes when the fast extends beyond physical acts and enters the domain of the mind, the self, the inner observer. During Ramzan, the environment encourages this deeper fasting. Moments of reflection, prayer, and self-awareness illuminate egoic patterns. A person may notice anger, pride, jealousy, or attachment rising within themselves, even while they abstain physically. This recognition is uncomfortable because the ego instinctively resists observation. It fears dissolution. It seeks justification. It thrives on unconscious repetition. The challenge lies in responding differently. To fast the ego is not to suppress desire or deny self. It is to understand desire. It is to observe impulses without automatically acting on them. It is to recognize the subtle ways the self seeks control, validation, and escape. And in doing so, the individual begins to cultivate freedom from habitual patterns that the body alone cannot overcome. The distinction explains why some people emerge from Ramzan permanently changed while others do not. A person who fasts only the body may gain temporary discipline, social respect, or spiritual satisfaction, all meaningful in their own way, but the underlying self remains largely unchanged. When the body resumes normal function, ego-driven patterns resume as well. Those who engage in fasting of the ego, however, experience a more subtle but profound transformation. They no longer obey impulses blindly. They see motivations clearly. They practice restraint, not because rules demand it, but because awareness has redefined desire itself. Over time, this rewires behavior, reshapes identity, and allows the lessons of Ramzan to persist long after the month ends. Fasting the ego is not easy. It requires courage to witness oneself without illusion. It requires honesty, humility, and patience. It demands confronting parts of the self that are uncomfortable or unwelcome. But the rewards are enduring. Freedom from unconscious habits, clarity of perception, and alignment between action and conscience. In essence, Ramzan offers a dual fasting, one of the body and one of the ego. Most people focus on the first because it is tangible, measurable, and socially acknowledged. The second is hidden, private, and psychologically demanding. Yet the second is the key to permanent change. One can survive the hunger of the body without touching the ego. But until the ego is touched, the transformation remains incomplete. The month itself does not force egoic fasting. It provides conditions, structure, reflection, awareness, and sacred rhythm. Whether a person chooses to engage the ego, to witness and release its subtle claims, determines whether the fast will become a fleeting trial or a doorway to lasting transformation. Thus, the difference between temporary discipline and permanent change is often invisible. It is not in the meals skipped, the prayers performed, or the nights spent in devotion. It is in the quiet confrontation of the self, the willingness to fast not just the body, but the ego that governs every habit, every impulse, every desire that once ruled unchallenged. Every human being carries within themselves a silent war, a war rarely acknowledged, even less often understood. On one side lies desire, a relentless, instinctive force shaped by habit, conditioning, and biological impulse. Desire demands satisfaction, instant gratification, comfort, and recognition. It whispers constantly, reminding the mind of what it wants, what it fears losing, what it craves to soothe emptiness or reinforce identity. On the other side stands awareness, the subtle, quiet observer within, capable of noticing, reflecting, and choosing. Awareness does not fight desire aggressively. It does not yell or push. It simply illuminates, creating space for observation. Yet in that space lies extraordinary power. Awareness allows choice. Awareness creates the possibility that desire may be recognized, understood, and eventually transcended. Ramzan brings this battle into sharp relief. Hunger awakens desire in its most primal form. Thirst, fatigue, and fatigue-induced irritability stir the body's habitual cravings. Every thought may remind the mind of comfort denied. Every instinct seeks escape. And yet the same environment that intensifies desire also amplifies awareness. The sacred rhythm of fasting, prayer, and reflection continually calls the mind to observe itself, to notice impulses as they arise, without surrendering to them. For some, desire dominates the battle. The mind experiences every urge as urgent, every craving as intolerable. Awareness remains weak, distracted, or superficial. These individuals may follow the external rules, fasting, praying, participating, but internally, desire whispers, complains, and occasionally sabotages. The inner war is ongoing, unnoticed, or unresolved. External compliance masks internal struggle, but it cannot erase it. For others, awareness grows stronger than desire, or at least more influential. The moment hunger arises, it is no longer experienced as torment, but as data. The mind notices tension, observes thought, and recognizes craving without necessarily acting on it. Desire still exists, but it is contextualized, rendered conscious. Impulses can still arise, but they are seen as waves passing through awareness, not commands that must be obeyed. This is the hidden skill of those transformed by Ramzan. They do not annihilate desire. They do not punish themselves for wanting. They cultivate awareness so precise, so patient, that desire loses its automatic control. They learn to move through life with a companionable relationship to craving, noticing, respecting, and sometimes redirecting it without being consumed. The contrast explains why some people revert after the month ends, while others do not. Those who never engage awareness deeply remain at the mercy of desire. When structure, social reinforcement, and sacred timing disappear, desire reasserts itself effortlessly. The inner war was never won. It was merely postponed under favorable conditions. Those who integrate awareness, however, carry a permanent advantage. Their capacity to observe becomes habitual. Desire still exists, but it is no longer the unconscious ruler of action. The self begins to exercise choice even without external prompts. Restraint becomes internalized. Discipline becomes natural. Insight becomes lived experience. Ramzan does not eliminate desire. It exposes it. The fasting body, the quiet nights, the structured days, all of these create conditions for the mind to notice patterns previously hidden. Desire becomes visible, and visibility is the first step toward mastery. Only when awareness meets desire directly does transformation become possible. In this battle, the terrain is subtle. The mind can pretend to fight, the heart can pretend to yield, and the body can comply mechanically. Yet these superficial victories leave desire unchanged, invisible to observation, quietly awaiting the return of unstructured life. Lasting change requires more than compliance. It demands that awareness consistently witness desire, recognize its origin, and choose alignment with higher intention. This is why the month feels simultaneously difficult and illuminating. It intensifies cravings while heightening consciousness. It makes restraint challenging while expanding perception. And it is precisely in this tension, the invisible battle between desire and awareness, that the seed of permanent change is planted. Those who cultivate awareness during the struggle find that even when Ramzan ends, the battle continues, and is slowly, quietly won from within. Most people believe change begins with decision. A conscious choice, a moment of resolve, a clear intention to become different. But real lasting change rarely begins in the mind. It begins in emotion. Not shallow emotion, not temporary inspiration, guilt or excitement, but deep emotional awakening. The kind that shifts how reality feels, not just how it is understood, the kind that rearranges perception itself. Because human beings do not transform simply because they know something. They transform because they feel something so deeply that returning to their old way of being becomes unbearable. Ramzan has a unique ability to awaken emotion in ways ordinary life rarely does. The stillness of hunger softens emotional defenses. The quiet of reflection allows buried feelings to surface. The rhythm of prayer slows mental noise, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, people begin to feel more sensitivity, more awareness, more vulnerability. Things that once felt ordinary begin to feel heavy with meaning. A simple moment of silence feels profound. A memory carries unexpected weight. A small act of kindness moves the heart more deeply than usual. Even regret, something often avoided, becomes vivid and undeniable. This is emotional awakening. It is not always comfortable. In fact, it often begins with discomfort. When emotional numbness dissolves, everything that was suppressed begins to rise: grief, guilt, longing, compassion, gratitude, fear, love. The heart, long quiet beneath routine and distraction, begins speaking again. And when the heart speaks clearly enough, change becomes possible. Because emotion is the energy of transformation. It is what gives meaning to insight. It is what turns reflection into urgency. It is what makes awareness feel personal, not abstract. A person may intellectually understand that life is temporary, but when they feel the fragility of time, their priorities shift. A person may logically know they have made mistakes, but when they feel the weight of those mistakes, they seek reconciliation. A person may conceptually believe in compassion, but when they feel another's suffering as their own, kindness becomes instinctive. Emotion makes truth alive. This is why some people leave Ramzan permanently changed. They did not just think differently, they felt differently. Something inside them moved deeply enough to reorganize their internal world. But emotional awakening does not happen equally for everyone. Some people experience only surface-level emotion, brief inspiration, temporary softness, passing sensitivity. These feelings, while real, do not penetrate deeply enough to reshape identity. They rise, they fade, and life continues unchanged. Others experience something more profound, an emotional confrontation with themselves. They feel the weight of their habits. The distance between who they are and who they want to be becomes painfully clear. Regret becomes not just memory, but living sensation. Gratitude becomes overwhelming. Compassion becomes unavoidable. These individuals cannot simply go back to normal because normal no longer feels acceptable. This is the doorway to transformation. But emotional awakening requires openness, and openness requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is something many people unconsciously resist. To feel deeply is to lose control. To allow emotions to surface is to risk discomfort, uncertainty, even pain. Many people maintain emotional distance not because they lack feeling, but because feeling fully would disrupt the stability of their identity, so they remain partially closed, protected, guarded. They participate in the rituals, they follow the structure, they engage intellectually, but they do not fully allow themselves to feel. And without emotional activation, change remains conceptual rather than lived. This is why two people can share the same experience yet emerge completely different. One allowed themselves to be moved, the other remained internally defended. Emotion is the gateway, but it must be entered willingly. And here lies an important truth. Emotional awakening alone is not transformation. It is the beginning of transformation. Feeling deeply opens the door, but walking through requires integration. A person must not only experience emotion, they must listen to it, learn from it, and allow it to guide action beyond the moment. If emotion is ignored after being awakened, it fades. If it is honored, it reshapes behavior, perception, and identity. This is why Ramzan is so powerful and so temporary. It creates conditions that make emotional awakening more likely. It softens defenses, slows distractions, and exposes inner life. But once the environment changes, emotional intensity naturally diminishes. For some, the awakening was deep enough that its echo remains. Their perception of life has shifted permanently. They cannot unfeel what they felt. For others, the emotional opening closes again. Not because the experience was false, but because it was not fully integrated. And so the doorway appeared, but was never fully crossed. This is the hidden truth. Transformation does not begin when behavior changes. It begins when the heart feels something it cannot forget, and whether that feeling becomes permanent depends on what happens next. Two people can perform the same actions, yet live completely different inner realities. They wake at the same time, they fast the same hours, they stand in the same prayers, they speak the same words. From the outside, their lives appear identical, synchronized, disciplined, devoted. But internally, something invisible separates them. That invisible force is intention. Intention is not simply what you plan to do. It is why you are doing it. It is the direction of the heart beneath the movement of the body. It is the silent orientation of consciousness toward meaning, purpose, or self. And intention quietly determines the depth of every experience. During Ramzan, actions are structured and visible. But intention is hidden, known only to the individual and the deepest part of their awareness. This is why Ramzan becomes a month not just of behavior, but of inner alignment. Some people fast because it is expected, because it is tradition, because family, society, or routine carries them forward. Their actions are sincere, but their intention is external. They are responding to structure, not transforming through purpose. Others fast with a different orientation. Each act becomes deliberate. Hunger is not endured passively, it is embraced consciously. Restraint is not performed, it is offered. Reflection is not accidental, it is sought. For them, every moment of Ramzan becomes charged with meaning, because intention turns action into awareness. This difference is subtle but profound. When action is performed without deep intention, it remains mechanical. Even if it is done correctly, consistently, and sincerely, it stays at the level of behavior. It shapes routine, but it does not necessarily reshape identity. But when intention is present, clear, focused, alive, action penetrates deeper. The same behavior begins to transform perception. The same discipline begins to reorganize the inner world. The same experience becomes personal, intimate, and psychologically significant. Intention gives experience depth. Imagine two people walking the same path. One walks because they were told to. The other walks because they are searching for something essential to their existence. Their footsteps may look identical, but their inner journeys are not even comparable. One is passing through time, the other is being changed by it. This is why intention decides who transforms. Because transformation does not happen to those who merely participate. It happens to those who engage consciously, those who bring awareness into every act, those who treat each moment not as obligation but as opportunity for inner refinement. Intention directs attention, and attention shapes reality. Whatever a person intends, they begin to notice. Whatever they notice repeatedly becomes psychologically significant. Whatever becomes significant begins to reorganize behavior, emotion, and identity. If a person intends only to complete the fast, they will notice hunger, time, and relief. Their experience will revolve around endurance. If a person intends self-awareness, they will notice impatience, emotional reactions, subtle impulses, inner resistance. Their experience will revolve around insight. If a person intends closeness to meaning, they will notice moments of stillness, gratitude, humility, compassion. Their experience will revolve around connection. Same environment, same actions, different inner worlds, shaped entirely by intention. But intention has another hidden power. It sustains change beyond the environment that created it. When behavior is driven by structure alone, it disappears when structure disappears. But when behavior is driven by deeply rooted intention, it continues even without external support, because intention lives inside the person, not outside. This is why some people remain transformed after Ramzan ends. Their actions during the month were never dependent solely on timing, community, or atmosphere. They were guided by an internal orientation that remains intact even when the environment shifts. Their intention becomes their compass. But forming true intention requires honesty. It requires asking difficult questions. Why am I doing this? What do I truly seek? What am I willing to confront? What am I willing to release? What kind of person am I becoming through these actions? Many people never ask these questions. They move through Ramzan sincerely, but unconsciously, carried by structure, rather than guided by purpose. And there is nothing inherently wrong with this. Participation itself has value. Discipline itself has meaning. But transformation belongs to those who combine participation with conscious intention, because intention is what converts experience into inner change. It is the difference between passing through a sacred time and allowing that time to reshape who you are. In the end, Ramzan offers the same opportunities to everyone. The same days, the same nights, the same hunger, the same silence, the same rhythm of reflection. But intention determines what those experiences become. For some, they become memories. For others, they become turning points. And the difference exists entirely within the quiet direction of the heart, the unseen force that decides whether a person simply practices discipline or is permanently transformed by it. When Ramzan ends, something subtle yet powerful begins to unfold, not outside but within. Life resumes its familiar rhythm. Meals return to normal timing. Sleep patterns relax. Social energy rises. Entertainment reappears. Structure loosens. And slowly, almost invisibly, the gravitational pull of comfort begins to reclaim its territory. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no sudden collapse of discipline, no loud rejection of the changes experienced. Instead, there is a gentle slide back into familiarity, a quiet psychological return to what feels easy, predictable, and known. This is the return of the comfort zone. The comfort zone is not simply a place of physical ease. It is a psychological environment where the mind feels safe because everything operates according to established patterns. Habits run automatically. Emotional responses are predictable. Identity feels stable. Nothing demands deep effort or conscious awareness. Human beings are naturally drawn to this state because the brain is designed to conserve energy. Anything unfamiliar requires attention. Anything that demands change requires effort. But familiar routines require almost none. They run on autopilot, allowing the mind to relax into efficiency rather than engagement. During Ramzan, the comfort zone is temporarily disrupted. The structure of the month forces unfamiliar rhythms. Hunger interrupts automatic eating. Reflection interrupts constant distraction. Discipline interrupts impulsive behavior. Awareness interrupts unconscious living. Even sleep, conversation, and emotional expression shift away from their usual patterns. For an entire month, the comfort zone loosens its grip. And while this disruption can be difficult, it is also precisely what allows growth to occur. Growth always happens outside the comfort zone, because growth requires adaptation, attention, and conscious choice. It requires living in a state of intentional awareness, rather than automatic repetition. But once Ramzan ends, the external forces that maintained this disruption begin to dissolve. No more fixed fasting hours. No more collective rhythm of restraint. No more constant reminders of sacred structure. No more shared atmosphere reinforcing discipline. And when external pressure disappears, the mind naturally seeks equilibrium, the most efficient, least demanding state it remembers. It seeks the comfort zone. This return does not feel like regression. It feels like relief, rest, normalcy, balance. After all, maintaining heightened awareness and disciplined restraint requires energy. The mind, exhausted from sustained effort, welcomes the familiar patterns it knows how to navigate effortlessly. This is why the return to old habits rarely feels like a conscious decision. It feels natural, gradual, justified, even reasonable. A person may say, "I need to relax now," or "life is back to normal," or "I'll keep some changes but not everything." These thoughts are not necessarily wrong, but they reveal the quiet negotiation between growth and comfort taking place within the mind. The comfort zone does not force itself back. It invites. It offers ease where effort once existed. It offers familiarity, where awareness once demanded attention. It offers stability where transformation once required courage. And most people accept the invitation without resistance. But here lies the deeper psychological truth. The comfort zone is not neutral. It preserves the past. Whatever habits, perceptions, and identity existed before Ramzan are embedded within that zone. When a person fully returns to it, they are not simply resting. They are re-entering the psychological environment that originally shaped their old patterns. And environment shapes behavior more powerfully than intention alone. This is why many people struggle to maintain change after Eid. It is not because they lack sincerity, it is because they have re-entered the very system that previously reinforced their unconscious habits. The same routines, the same triggers, the same emotional responses, the same patterns of distraction and indulgence. Without conscious resistance, the system naturally restores equilibrium, and equilibrium means returning to what is familiar. But not everyone returns fully. Some individuals experience the pull of comfort but do not surrender to it entirely. They allow certain routines to return, but they protect the awareness they gained. They maintain small acts of discipline. They preserve moments of reflection. They carry forward fragments of the structure that once surrounded them. These individuals do something subtle but powerful. They expand their comfort zone instead of retreating fully into the old one. What once felt uncomfortable, awareness, restraint, intentional living, gradually becomes familiar. The boundaries of comfort shift to include growth rather than exclude it. This is the psychological foundation of lasting transformation. True change is not about permanently living in discomfort. It is about redefining what feels natural. When awareness becomes familiar, when discipline becomes effortless, when reflection becomes instinctive, the comfort zone itself evolves. But this evolution requires conscious effort at the moment when comfort returns most strongly, immediately after Ramzan ends. Because that is when the mind quietly asks a question most people never notice. Will you return to who you were, or will you redefine what feels normal now? Most people do not answer consciously. They drift. But those who transform forever recognize this moment as the real test. Not the discipline during Ramzan, but the choices made when discipline is no longer externally required. Because transformation is proven, not when structure exists, but when comfort invites you back, and you choose awareness anyway. There is a principle that governs almost every process in existence. Movement tends to continue once it begins. A body in motion remains in motion, unless something interrupts it. Energy, once activated, seeks continuation. Patterns, once established, tend to repeat. This principle exists not only in the physical world, but in the inner world as well. It is called momentum. And in the context of Ramzan, spiritual momentum may be one of the most overlooked forces determining who continues growing and who slowly stops. During Ramzan, the structure of life generates powerful spiritual movement. Daily routines shift, awareness intensifies, reflection becomes frequent, discipline becomes consistent, emotional sensitivity deepens, acts of restraint, devotion, and self-observation occur repeatedly, day after day, night after night. This repetition is not just behavioral, it is neurological, psychological, and emotional. The mind becomes accustomed to heightened awareness. The heart becomes familiar with reflection. The body adapts to discipline. Attention is repeatedly redirected inward. Something begins moving. At first, this movement requires effort. Waking early feels difficult. Restraining impulses feels heavy. Sustaining focus feels unnatural. But repetition changes the experience. What was once effortful becomes familiar. What was once unfamiliar becomes stable. The mind begins to reorganize around this new rhythm. And this is where momentum is born. Momentum is not created by intensity alone. It is created by consistency. Small, repeated actions performed regularly generate a flow of movement that becomes easier to maintain over time. Each act of awareness strengthens the next. Each moment of restraint reinforces future restraint. Each reflection deepens the capacity for further reflection. Gradually, the system begins to carry itself. But something important must happen for momentum to survive beyond Ramzan. It must be protected during the transition back to ordinary life, because momentum is powerful but fragile during change. When Ramzan ends, the external forces that helped initiate spiritual movement disappear. The schedule relaxes, the environment shifts, social reinforcement weakens, distractions return, old rhythms attempt to reassert themselves. This moment is critical. If movement is allowed to stop completely, even briefly, inertia takes over. The system returns to stillness. And once stillness returns, restarting movement requires effort all over again. This is why many people experience a sharp contrast after Eid. During Ramzan, everything felt alive, meaningful, flowing. Afterward, awareness feels distant, reflection feels heavy, discipline feels forced. The inner movement has slowed or stopped entirely. Not because transformation was false, but because momentum was not maintained. Those who keep going understand something subtle but essential. Continuity matters more than intensity. They do not attempt to recreate Ramzan in full. They do not expect the same atmosphere, structure, or emotional intensity. A few moments of daily reflection, a small act of consistent restraint, a conscious pause before reacting, a maintained rhythm of awareness. These small continuations act like gentle pushes that prevent momentum from collapsing. The inner movement slows, but it does not stop. And because it does not stop, growth continues naturally, quietly, steadily. Over time, this becomes effortless. The person no longer feels they are trying to maintain change. Movement has become their natural state. Awareness flows without force. Discipline arises without struggle. Reflection occurs without deliberate effort. This is spiritual momentum fully integrated. But why do some people preserve it while others let it fade? The answer lies in perception. Some people see Ramzan as an event, a sacred period with a beginning and an end. When the time ends, the experience ends. The structure dissolves, and so does the movement it created. Others see Ramzan as an initiation, the beginning of movement, not its completion. They understand that what started during the month is meant to continue afterward, even if in smaller, quieter ways. They treat the end of Ramzan not as a finish line, but as a transition point, and this perception changes everything. Because when movement is understood as ongoing, the mind naturally seeks continuity. It looks for ways to sustain rhythm. It preserves what was gained instead of releasing it completely. Momentum survives through intention, awareness, and consistency, not through intensity alone. There is also another hidden factor, emotional memory. Those who experience deep meaning during Ramzan remember how that state felt. The clarity, the stillness, the alignment, the inner peace. That memory becomes motivating. They do not want to lose that state entirely, so they protect the habits that keep them connected to it. Others, who experienced only surface-level discipline, have no emotional anchor pulling them forward. Without strong emotional memory, there is little internal force sustaining movement once external structure disappears, and so momentum fades naturally. But for those who keep going, something remarkable happens over time. The distance between Ramzan self and ordinary self begins to shrink. The heightened awareness, once limited to a sacred month, gradually becomes a permanent feature of daily life. The spiritual rhythm that once required structure becomes self-sustaining. Ramzan stops being a temporary elevation and becomes the starting point of a continuous journey. This is why some people appear permanently changed. Not because they experienced something others did not, but because they allowed the movement that began within them to continue. Even after the environment that created it was gone, they understood that transformation is not a moment. It is momentum maintained. For most people, Ramzan exists in time. It arrives, it unfolds, and then it ends. 30 days of altered rhythm, 30 days of discipline, 30 days of sacred atmosphere. It is experienced like a season, something to enter, live through, and eventually leave behind. But for some, a quiet shift occurs. Subtle, almost invisible at first. Ramzan stops feeling like a period of time and begins to feel like a revelation. It stops being something they observe and becomes something that reveals them to themselves. This is the moment Ramzan becomes a mirror. A mirror does not create anything new. It does not impose change. It simply reflects what is already present but rarely seen clearly. And when Ramzan becomes a mirror, Every experience within it begins reflecting the inner condition of the person living through it. Hunger is no longer just physical discomfort. It reflects impatience, emotional reactivity, and the mind's relationship with control. Silence is no longer just absence of noise. It reflects how comfortable or uncomfortable one is with their own thoughts. Prayer is no longer just ritual. It reflects presence or distraction, sincerity or mechanical repetition. Restraint is no longer just discipline. It reflects the strength or fragility of self-awareness. Every moment becomes diagnostic. Instead of asking, "What is Ramzan asking from me?" the question shifts to, "What is Ramzan showing me about myself?" This shift is profound because it turns experience into self-revelation. Many people go through Ramzan trying to perform well, to fast properly, pray consistently, maintain discipline. Their focus is outward, on behavior, structure, expectation, completion. But when Ramzan becomes a mirror, performance loses importance. Observation becomes central. The person begins watching themselves closely, not with judgment but with curiosity. They notice how quickly irritation arises, how easily attention drifts, how often intention weakens, how frequently comfort is prioritized over awareness. They also notice something else, unexpected softness, moments of sincerity, flashes of compassion, glimpses of stillness they never realized existed within them. The mirror reflects both shadow and light. And once a person sees themselves clearly, something irreversible happens. Illusion weakens. It becomes harder to pretend patience when impatience has been witnessed repeatedly. Harder to claim presence when distraction has been observed intimately. Harder to believe one is fully aware when unconscious patterns have revealed their power. But it also becomes impossible to deny moments of clarity, humility, and peace once they have been directly experienced. The mirror removes ambiguity. And this is why some people cannot return unchanged after Ramzan. Because once you have seen yourself clearly, truly seen, you cannot fully return to unconscious living. You may drift. You may forget temporarily. But somewhere within, the memory of clarity remains. You know what is happening inside you, even when you choose not to act on it. This is the beginning of permanent awareness. But the mirror effect requires something rare: willingness to look honestly. Many people encounter the mirror, but glance away quickly. Self-observation can be uncomfortable. Seeing one's own patterns, contradictions, and hidden motivations can feel destabilizing. The ego prefers coherence, the belief that we are already who we think we are. The mirror disrupts that belief. It reveals the gap between intention and action, between identity and reality, between who we believe ourselves to be and who we actually are in unguarded moments. Not everyone is ready to face that gap. So some treat Ramzan only as time, something external, structured, temporary. When the month ends, the mirror disappears because they never truly looked into it. But those who look deeply experience something different. They realize Ramzan was never meant to change time. It was meant to reveal the self moving through time. They realize fasting did not just restrain the body, it exposed the mind. They realize silence did not just quiet the world, it amplified inner noise. They realize discipline did not just control behavior, it illuminated identity. And once this realization occurs, Ramzan can never again be just a month. It becomes a reference point, a standard of clarity against which ordinary life is unconsciously measured, a memory of heightened self-visibility that lingers long after routines return to normal. Life after Ramzan feels different, not because the world changed, but because the person has seen themselves more clearly within it. And the deepest transformation begins, not when a person behaves differently, but when they can no longer avoid seeing who they are, moment by moment. This is the power of the mirror. Because time passes, months begin and end. Rituals come and go, but self-recognition, once awakened, does not fully fade. And when Ramzan becomes a mirror instead of a month, transformation is no longer something that happens during a sacred time. It becomes something that continues. Every time the person dares to look inward and see, there is a moment in every real transformation that cannot be reversed. A silent threshold, an invisible crossing, a point where a person no longer returns to who they were, not because they are trying to change, but because they cannot be the same anymore. Most people assume change is gradual, slow, measured, step by step, but the deepest transformations do not happen like that. They build quietly, invisibly, beneath awareness. Then suddenly, something shifts completely and permanently. This is the point of no return. During Ramzan, Many people experience powerful emotions. They feel closer to truth, more aware of their weaknesses, more sensitive to meaning, but for most, these feelings rise and then fade, like waves that touch the shore but never reshape the land. For a few, something else happens. At some moment, perhaps in a quiet night of prayer, perhaps in an unexpected tear, perhaps in a moment of painful honesty with oneself, a person sees something they cannot unsee, and that vision changes everything. Real transformation does not begin when behavior changes. It begins when self-perception changes, when a person no longer believes the same story about who they are. Before this moment, discipline feels like effort. After it, discipline feels like alignment. Before this moment, resisting temptation feels like sacrifice. After it, giving in feels unnatural. Before this moment, spirituality is something a person practices. After it, spirituality becomes something they are aware of constantly, like a background presence that never fully disappears. This is why the point of no return is so quiet, yet so absolute. Nothing dramatic may happen on the outside. The same life continues, the same routines, the same world, but internally the structure of identity rearranges itself, and identity is the deepest force guiding behavior. Most people try to change habits while keeping their identity intact. They attempt to act differently while still believing they are the same person. This creates tension. Eventually, the old identity pulls them back because behavior always follows self-image. But when identity itself shifts, behavior follows naturally, effortlessly, permanently. This shift often begins with a realization so simple, yet so destabilizing, that it shakes the foundation of the self. It may be the realization of how fragile life truly is, or how deeply one has been asleep in distraction, or how much time has already been lost, or how close truth has always been, yet ignored. When this realization is not just understood intellectually, but felt existentially, something irreversible happens. The person cannot comfortably return to unconscious living, because awareness has already expanded beyond that boundary. It is like waking up in a room you once thought was the whole world, only to discover a door leading to infinite space. Once you have seen the door, pretending it does not exist becomes psychologically impossible. This is why real change often feels less like becoming someone new, and more like being unable to continue pretending. The old patterns do not disappear instantly. Desires still exist, weakness still whispers, habits still pull. But something fundamental has shifted. Awareness is now present during the pull. And awareness changes the entire experience of desire. Before transformation, desire feels like identity. This is what I want, therefore this is who I am. After transformation, desire becomes an object of observation. This urge is arising, but it is not me. That separation between the self and the impulse is the true turning point. Because once a person experiences themselves as the observer rather than the impulse, control becomes possible in a completely new way. Not forced control, but conscious choice. And conscious choice, repeated over time, stabilizes the new identity. This is the point of no return. Not perfection. Not constant strength. Not the absence of struggle, but the permanent presence of awareness. From this point forward, even if a person slips, they cannot slip unconsciously. Even if they fall while knowing they are falling. And that awareness prevents the fall from becoming a permanent state. Ramzan becomes the birthplace of this awakening for some people, because it creates the perfect conditions: silence, restraint, reflection, emotional openness, and confrontation with the self. But the month itself does not create the transformation. But it only brings a person close enough to themselves that they might finally see clearly. And once a person truly sees, not with the eyes, but with the core of their being, the illusion of their old self begins to dissolve. Slowly at first, then permanently. This is why some people leave Ramzan, simply relieved that it is over, while others leave with a strange, quiet certainty that something inside them has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. They may not be able to explain it, they may not even fully understand it, but deep within, they know they are no longer living the same life, because they are no longer the same person. Ramzan never changes anyone by force. It never guarantees transformation. It never promises permanence. It only opens a door, quietly, gently, patiently, and then waits to see who will truly walk through it. This is why two people can live the same days, fast the same hours, stand in the same prayers, whisper the same words, yet leave with completely different lives. Because Ramzan is not a program that installs change. It is a mirror that reveals truth. And not everyone is ready to look long enough to see themselves clearly. For some, the month becomes a temporary interruption, a pause from indulgence, a season of restraint, a structured environment that holds them still for a while. But once that structure disappears, they return to the gravity of old patterns. Not because they are weak, but because nothing fundamental inside them shifted. The surface moved, but the center remained untouched. For others, something deeper happens. They do not just fast, they notice. They do not just pray, they feel. They do not just reflect, they confront. And in that confrontation, something awakens that cannot fall back asleep so easily. Because real change does not come from what we do repeatedly for 30 days. It comes from what we realize in a single honest moment. A moment when distraction fades, excuses fall silent, and a person sees themselves without filters. That moment can quietly rearrange the direction of an entire life. This is the hidden secret behind lasting transformation. Ramzan does not change people. Awareness does. Ramzan does not purify hearts. Sincerity does. Ramzan does not sustain growth. Conscious choice does, long after the month ends. The ones who change forever are not the ones who performed the most rituals, but the ones who allowed the month to penetrate their identity. They carried the awareness forward. They protected the sensitivity they discovered. They refused to forget what they felt when the world became quiet enough to hear their own soul. And that is the real test. Not how we live during Ramzan, but who we become after it. Because when the structure disappears, when the nights return to normal, when the world becomes loud again, the mirror is no longer held in front of us. We must choose to keep looking on our own. Some do, most don't. And that is why every year the same sacred month arrives, yet the same divide remains. One group remembers what they saw within themselves and keeps walking forward. The other slowly forgets, until the next Ramzan comes and the door opens once again, always waiting, always silent, always offering the same question. Did you merely pass through the month, or did the month pass through you?